Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the course of 14th to 18th century poetry. The topic of today's lecture is a poem, The Good Morrow, and this very poem is by Donne, and we are analyzing this poem in this lecture. I am your teacher Muhammad Asif Khan, Lecturer, Department of English, Kohat University of Science and Technology. Discussion agenda for today's class is that first of all, I will introduce this poem to you, and then we will analyze the form, rhyme scheme, speaker and setting of this poem. And after this initial discussion, I will move towards the line by line analysis of stanza 1, stanza 2, and then stanza 3. After completing this discussion, I will give you a brief analysis of the literary devices that are being used by the poet in the poem The Good Morrow. Dear students, let's move towards the introduction of this very poem. The Good Morrow is one of the Donne's metaphysical love poem. Especially it's Obade, and Obade means a morning love poem or a song. It is one of the many secular poems he wrote, and this very poem is heavily contrasting with his later works, in which we see that he turned his attention towards the holy, sacred and divine aspect of the poetry. So this very poem was first published in 1633, but most probably this very poem was written when he was a young man, and I feel that this poem was written at that time when he recently married. This poem has 3 stanzas, and this poem has deceptively simple opening. Now, I will take you towards the form of this poem, and you will see that Good Morrow is a good example of Donne's unique approach to the form. This poem has 3 stanzas. This is the first stanza, and this one is the second stanza, and this is the last stanza of this poem. You can see that these 3 stanzas, each of these stanzas have 7 lines. And this is very unusual because most of the English stanzas have even number of lines. Because this very approach to bring even numbers in the stanzas helps poets to keep their rhyme scheme orderly. And it also helps to keep the symmetrical shape of a poem. Since it is very awkward to fit an extra line into a rhyming scheme, and Donne has did this very strange thing in the rhyming scheme. So you see that the poem's 3 stanzas comprises 7 lines each, and this very pattern is very opposite to the common tradition of the poetry that was being followed in that time. Now let's move towards the rhyme scheme. In The Good Morrow, we see that each 7-line stanza is rhymed AB, AB and CCC. So the first 4 lines follow the very common and usual pattern of the English poetry, but the last 3 consecutive C's, it basically brings that strange aspect of the rhyme scheme in the poetry of English literature that gives the unusual aspect to the poetry of Donne. As I told you that his stanzas comprise of 7 lines, and I also gave you the rhyme scheme, we see that we can divide these stanzas into 2 subunits, And these units can be named as a quatrain and tercet. So the first quatrain follows the pattern AB, AB, and the last tercet follows a very unusual pattern of C, C, C. As I give you the examples, like I rhymes with childishly, that is a slant rhyme, whereas other lines exactly rhymes, like then rhymes with den, and in the last three lines we can see that B rhymes with C and C rhymes with D. So these three last lines of this first stanza are C, C, C. This is the rhyme scheme. Initial quatrain follows AB, AB, while the final tercet that rhymes C, C, C. To make the matter even strange, the poem's meter is irregular. When you study the meter of this very poem, it also follows an unusual pattern. The first 6 lines of each stanza are in iambic pentameter, whereas the final line is in iambic hexameter. I will just read the first line to you, and you can easily see that how this line is arranged in iambic pentameter. We can divide this line into 5 foots. The first one is I won thereby my troth, what thou and I. I won thereby my troth, what thou and I. So this is the way we can divide this very line into iambic pentameters, but it is very uncommon pattern, irregular pattern of meter in this very poem, because in the first 6 lines it follows iambic pentameter, and the final line of the stanza, that is the 7th line of each stanza, that follows iambic hexameter. There are many other deviations also there, but the common pattern of the meter that is being followed in this poem is that of iambic pentameter and iambic hexameter. Now let's move towards the speaker of this poem, and we see the poem starts with the word I, but this speaker is anonymous lover, and the poem does not provide much information about this lover. And the reader does not even learn speaker's name, or reader is not clear about the gender, but almost all the scholars who have analyzed this very poem, they assume that the speaker is male. We are not clear about the class or the profession or the nationality of the speaker. All these things are hidden, and similarly we see that the poem refrains from giving its readers much information about the speaker's lover, though it seems that whoever he or she is, he or she does not resent, or he is not resisting the speaker. There is no resistance for the speaker. The ideas are flowing in this way. It seems that the speaker's lover, or the beloved of the speaker, agrees with him or her. So the speaker of the good Morrow is anonymous, and this is love poem, so anonymous lover is there. Now let's see the setting of the poem. And the poem, it comes from a specific relationship in specific time and place. As I told you in the beginning of this lecture, that this poem is basically a morning love poem or a morning love song, but the speaker does not provide much information about the exact time and place of this very poem. Or we can see that the speaker is not alluding to the historical or the political events that surround the poem's love affair. This gives the poem potentiality of the universal feelings, and it could describe any relationship in any time and any place. So a universal feel comes when you read this poem, because it is not time bound, and the place is not also specified for this very poem. So the setting of the poem, though initially the title of this very poem suggests that this poem is written in the morning time, but other than that there is no reference of the exact place or the time when it was written, or the historical and political surroundings of this very poem. So this is the setting of the poem. Now let's move towards the line by line analysis of this very poem. And dear students, when we look at the title of the poem, it is very easy to read the meanings from there, because the good morrow is archaic or an old-fashioned way of greeting someone. So it is basically similar to good morning or the greetings of the morning. And the reader has a clue in this very statement that the scene or the setting of this poem is set in the early part of the day. Now let's move towards the first line. And in the first line, I wonder by my troth what thou and I did till we loved. Were we not weaned till then? So the first line takes the reader into the mind of the first person speaker, who is either asking himself or his lover a very puzzling question. And here you can note the language of this sentence. It is basically the 17th century English. So thou means you, by my troth means in all honesty or truth, or we can also get another meanings from here, that here the poet is speaking on an oath. So all these meanings are related with this very phrase, by my troth. In all honesty, or in all truth, or we can also say that he is swearing that I swear that I am speaking truth. The first line is not an end line, and we see that it is a run-on line or enjambment. The idea is running into the second line, and this is carefully phrased question. In the end of this line and in the beginning of the second line, we see a question. What that small phrase did till we loved is very important, because it gives a sense to the previous lines, and it gives a very abrupt beginning to the poem. Because here he is asking, did till we loved, were we not weaned till then? Actually, he is saying this very thing, that just what kind of existence did the couple have before they fall in love? So he is asking himself. These are the rhetorical questions, and it is basically a question many lovers have asked, because when two become firmly unified in love, it is as if the time before their meeting is having no value for them. And they question this very thing. They didn't do anything meaningful before this time. All these things become meaningless. And the time they lived before this very specific time is meaningless to them. So they are questioning the worth of the events that happened to them before this. If we look at this very line, were we not weaned till then? It is another question. To be weaned is to be influenced from an early age, or we can also mean this very word weaned to be a baby or an infant that is being gradually given adult food while coming off a diet of mother's milk. That very time period is called to be weaned. Here the poet is saying, were we not weaned till then? Actually, we were not grown up at that time when we were not in this very love affair. The speaker is implying that they were infants before they loved. So the whole time that is before this event, that becomes meaningless. After that, in the third line, the poet says, but sucked on country players childishly. Here the poet reinforces the sense of childish existence that the two lovers had to go through before this very event. The country players are either very crude sensualities, or those country players were just immature players. Actually, he is here again reinforcing the idea that he expressed in the last line, that all these things were worthless, they hold no value. So the country players were crude sensualities for them, and that was a mere surface experience. There is no depth in those experiences. Another line, or snorted we in the seven sleepers' den. Here again, the writer is alluding to an event of the seven sleepers, or in Urdu we can say Ashab-e-Kahf, and we see that these very seven sleepers were the Christian youths who actually fled from the Roman Emperor Decius, and this very event happened between 249 and 251, and these very seven young men were sealed in a cave, and they slept there for nearly 200 years. So this very event goes, and when they woke up, the world was turned into a Christian world. So that very experience is being shared and has been alluded here, and he says that they lived life as if they were with the seven sleepers in their den, and they were snorting there, they were snoring there, they were just sleeping there, and they were not conscious of anything, and their life was like a sleep. So these first four lines with the alternate rhymes form a quatrain, and the end three lines have the same end rhymes and have that final hexameter that is a longer line. Now let's move towards the fifth line. It was so, but this all players' fancies be. The speaker confirms that, yes, before they were lovers, any players were not real. It was as if they were infants asleep, not really awake, but they were merrily dreaming. And Donne, because he is Donne, he goes on to say that his desires were fulfilled. He got what he wanted out of beauty, but even that was not real. It was only dream. So Donne says, if ever any beauty I did see, if I have seen any beauty which I desired, and he got that very thing, but a dream of thee, but all these things, even if he has got that very beauty, even that was not real, it was only a dream. So this is the first stanza of the good Morrow. Now let's move towards the second stanza, and in the second stanza we see the poet says, and now good morrow to our waking souls. Having concluded the first stanza that the lovers were not really alive or hadn't done anything until they fell in love and became aware, the speaker wishes both himself and his beloved a good morning as they wake from a long sleep. So this is a new beginning in their life. And then the poet says, and now good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear. So there is no fear in their relationship. They are totally devoted, and they are 100% in love. And in the third line, the poet says, for love, all love of other sides control, because they see the world through their love, and this love controls the whole world and everything, and all the love of other sides is being controlled by their love, and makes one little room everywhere. The poet says, and makes one little room, and everywhere the room the lovers are in, that is a small room. And here it represents the microcosm. Basically it is a philosophical idea, and we see that microcosm is a little world, or we can metaphorically connect it to the human race. Yet their love is universal because it goes everywhere. Their love spreads and goes everywhere, and it comprises of the whole because it represents the macrocosm, the whole of the complex structure of which that microcosm or human race is part of. As we, the human beings, we are microcosm, and we are part of that macrocosm. Macrocosm consists of the whole universe or the whole world, and we are part of that very whole. So this very room where they are residing, that turns into the whole universe. And we see that very idea basically comes from, and it reflects the Renaissance ideas that an individual held within them the universe. This is one another reference of or the reflection of the Renaissance idea in the poetry of John Donne, because to the Renaissance philosophers and scholars, an individual represents the whole universe. Now let's move towards the last three lines of this very stanza. These very lines are related to the explorations of the new world. The poet says, let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone. Let maps to other worlds on worlds have shown. Let us possess one world, each hath one and is one. Here Donne is using metaphors, and basically he is using these metaphors for showing this very thing, that there is no importance of this very world in his eyes when he is with his or her beloved. So Donne's use of metaphor is cutting edge for his time, because we see that explorers were discovering new areas in this world, and they were using latest maps, and we see that astronomers were seriously charting down the stars on the sky. So the known world was expanding rapidly. Before that there were many parts in this very world which were unknown, and now we see that people were exploring the things. So metaphorically Donne says that if they are exploring, or if they are mapping this very world, let them do that very thing, because they themselves possess one world, and each of them have their own world, but when they are together, that world has a new experience. So let us possess one world. In some version the speaker affirms that they have their individual worlds, but their love world that they possess, they totally own a whole new world which they are free to explore. They are free to explore this new world of love. Donne here says that they are free to explore this new world. In the third stanza, speaker initially gets close up and describes his personal feelings, and he says, my face in thine eye, thine in mine appears, and true plain hearts do in the faces rest. So Donne's fascination with the reflections and imagery comes to the front. As the lovers gaze into each other's eyes, they see the reflection of one another. And when they see the reflection of one another in the eyes of each other, They see this very thing as an evidence of more bonding or connection between two of them. So the lovers are true and plain. They do not need to pretend or show off to one another. They are true lovers. Where can we find two better hemispheres? Now the poet moves to the next line, where the speaker actually reverts to the questioning again that he put in the very first stanza, and asks his beloved, where can we find two better hemispheres, or semicircles, or hemispheres as the globe has, which could be their eyes and faces. He is saying that where can we find two better hemispheres? Actually, he is referring to their eyes and to their faces. So he says, where can we find two better hemispheres? Without sharp north, without declining west. These two phrases refer to the cold relationship. Then he refers to another idea, without declining west, and in this very phrase he wants to narrate this very thing, that the sun sets in the west, and when the sun sets, that is the end of the day, and metaphorically he is referring to the end of relationships. Actually, he wants to say that their relationship is without any cold emotions, and there is no end of this relationship. So the speaker in these 4 lines reinforced the idea that the lovers are a single entity, and their relationship is not cold, or it is not going to end, and it is warm and rising, ever and ever rising. Then the poet says, whatever dies was not mixed equally. It was basically a Renaissance belief in medical theory of that very time. Death was thought to be the result of imbalance in the body's elements. So the poet says, if our two loves be one, or thou and I, love so alike. The speaker suggests that if our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike, that none do slacken, none can die. The poet says that their two loves are not at all imbalanced, and their loves are so alike that they can never die. This very end of this poem is very idealistic end, because he is linking the lives of these two loves to never-ending life or infiniteness. Now we will see some of the literary terms and important concepts about this poem. We see enjambment in this very poem, as I told you earlier also. And what is enjambment in poetry? Enjambment is incomplete syntax, that is at the end of a line. This means run over from one poetic line to the next. As we see in the first very line, we see the idea is running over from the first line to the second line. In the same way it happened in the line, if ever any beauty I did see which I desired and got. Here also we see that there is enjambment. The same happened in the second last line also. If our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike. Here also we see that idea is running over from one line to the another line. The rest of the lines in this poem are end-stopped lines, and I have highlighted all those lines which are end-stopped lines, and you can see that this idea is not running over to the next line. So these are, I am just pointing out to you that these are end-stopped lines. Another literary device which we can very easily identify in this very poem is that of alliteration. You can see the alliteration like I in the first line, the W sound of wonder. In the same way it is repeated here in the what. I wonder by my troth what thou. So these are alliterations. We can also subcategorize this alliteration into assonance, so which is actually the repetition of same vowel sounds, as here we can see the repetition of O sound in wonder, troth, and thou. In the same way, the repetition of consonants is called consonants, and we also can identify the consonants in this poem. Another idea that this poem contains allusions, and allusion is a brief intentional reference to historical, mythic, or literary person, place, event, or movement. And we see here in this line, or snorted we in the seven sleepers' den. This is an allusion. In the same way, and makes one little room and everywhere. I have explained this concept to you, that how the microcosm is being linked to the macrocosm. That is a philosophical idea which Donne has alluded here. In the same way, we see other metaphors that are alluding towards the discoveries and the navigation and mapping of the world, and also discovery of the new worlds that was happening in that time. All these things are alluded by John Donne in this poem. In the same way, we see another allusion, and there also we see that he is referring towards the North Pole and the declining West. So these are allusions that he mentioned here. One very common literary device that Donne has used here is that of apostrophe, and it is that figure of speech in which the poet addresses an absent person, an abstract idea, or a thing. And we see that in this poem, the poet apostrophizes his beloved, and the whole poem is basically an apostrophe. In the same way, I can highlight an anaphora here. We see in the 3 consecutive lines there is repetition of let. It is anaphora. Anaphora is a literary device often used in political speeches, but we can also see this very literary device in prose and poetry. Anaphora is basically repetition of a word or words at the beginning of successive phrases, clauses, or lines. Basic aim behind that is to create a sonic effect. Here we see there is anaphora. Another important literary device that is being used by John Donne, that is rhetorical questions. And these questions are basically asked just to effect or to lay emphasis. As we see in the first line, there is a question, rhetorical question. This sequence continues to 4 lines, and we have a number of rhetorical questions. The same sequence again comes in this very part, and we see another rhetorical question: without sharp north, without declining west. This very rhetorical question. These questions may have an obvious answer, but the person who is asking question, he just want to emphasize his point of view. For that reason, he is asking these questions. So these are the literary devices which are being used in this very poem. In today's lecture, we have discussed the poem of John Donne, The Good Morrow, and I have given you the analysis of the form, rhyming scheme, and we also discussed the speaker and setting of the poem, and after that I have given line by line analysis of the whole poem. I hope that now you will be having very clear idea about this poem. Thank you very much for listening passionately.